Welcome back, everybody. Caroline Greeven lives in Ventura. She is a collaborator and ghostwriter with a background as a literary agent. Her recent writing projects include business and innovation guides. Her work includes celebrity memoirs, lifestyle and DIY guides, and Rick James's memoir, Confessions of a Super Freak. She has also worked as an editor and book doctor for publishers such as Harper One, Crown, and Bonus Books, and authors such as Mike Ness and the legendary punk band Social Distortion. I know Caroline because several years ago, some of you know that I wrote a book, and the first person that I consulted was Caroline because we had a mutual friend. And then I saw her again when she came to my first book signing, graciously hosted by Live Oak Unitarian Universalist here in Goleta. And then we just kept having conversations, and she became a part of the church that I used to lead in Oxnard, Church for the Nations. And then, well, she's now part of our Jesus Collective that meets online. And she, as part of introducing her, I considered reading Caroline. She's pretty vocal, especially in print. And I was going to read a piece of her hate mail, but let's just be a little bit more positive than that. But I love the fact that you all get to meet. We've had some folks from a beloved community speak to our Jesus Collective, and now we're gonna get the favor returned. So Caroline, take it away.
Well, thank you for that. This beautiful introduction. And I should clarify, I think it was hate mail that I received, not hate mail that I sent. So
did I say sent? Oh my goodness.
No, you didn't, but I just wanted to clarify.
All right.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm very excited and also very nervous, but let's plow ahead. So this is actually the third time I've spoken, and every time that I'm asked to speak, I do spend a good 2 weeks to a month wondering, what on earth am I going to say? I mean, what could I possibly talk about that is worth taking over 20 minutes of your Sunday to share? We all have busy lives full of things to see and do, and it can begin to feel like a bit of a weighty responsibility. Suppose I waste your time. What if my words and ideas aren't worth your attention? This week, it finally occurred to me, suppose that's what we talk about. After all, we all know that we have finite time in this world. So what do we choose to pay attention to? And what do we choose to focus on during those years that we have here? First of all, a question though. Does anyone else here feel like they just can't pay attention anymore? I know I do. I can't seem to follow a chain of thought for more than, on a good day, 60 seconds. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. I've lost what feels like years of my life to their endless content. My husband comments on it. He sees me sitting on my phone, loading up on all the outrages of the day. I scroll faster and faster, barely absorbing one hit of outrage before I'm on to the next. These outrages are rarely things that I've witnessed or experienced myself. Often they are the actions of people who are determinedly unreachable. Supposedly Democratic senators who prioritize venture fund owners over the poor, or who demand more fossil fuel extractions in exchange for climate change legislation. Even worse, they are little pinpricks of cruelty and absurdity. A Southern judge refusing parole to a person who has very clearly earned a second chance after decades of model behavior inside. A conservative governor waiting until the morning of an execution to commute the sentence of an obviously innocent man. My addiction to information isn't new. I am a news junkie after all, and I always have been. My 83-year-old father still reads the New York Times cover to cover every morning. My mother insisted on a subscription to the London Telegraph, even when her dementia was so bad that she could no longer read it. In fact, it is one of my greatest shames that I canceled her subscription to save money, because I no longer saw the point in her holding an unopened copy of a pretty expensive daily paper on her lap. It is to my eternal grief that I didn't understand what that paper meant, and the comfort that she took from her image of herself as an engaged, informed citizen. How the weight of that broadsheet, with all its different sections and Sunday magazines, made her feel like herself. I wish I could go back in time and let her keep her unopened paper, along with that sliver of herself that loved to read the news and know what was happening. I've moved a lot over my life, and my memories are full of front page stories from the Newport Daily News, the Miami Herald, the Guardian, the New York Times, the Santa Fe New Mexican, the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, Ventura County Star, even the Jackson Hole Daily. And I've never actually been inside a newsroom, but I can hear the rumble of the printing press in the basement. And I can feel the presence of Hildy Johnson sitting archly on the corner of a desk, working that rotary phone and bantering with Cary Grant. I kept for years the black and white Miami Herald cover story announcing Princess Diana had died. Shocking. I could still feel the visceral horror as I walked from the newspaper rack back to my apartment, engrossed in this awful news, but somehow also contained by the limits of the paper. I didn't have a TV, had only rudimentary internet, and rarely listened to the radio. So the Herald was more or less it in terms of knowing what happened. And frankly, it didn't occur to me that I needed more. Here's an interesting fact, according to Johann Hari in his book, Stolen Focus, which I've pulled some facts and quotes from for this talk. In 1986, if you added up all the information being blasted at the average human being, TV, radio, reading, it amounted to 40 newspapers worth of information every day. By 2007, it had risen to the equivalent of 174 newspapers per day. And obviously it is even more now. No wonder our minds are whirling with ideas and information. Talking about the ever-growing deluge of information and how our attention and focus respond to it might seem like a very secular topic for Sunday morning at church. In fact, Stolen Focus dives deep on everything we lose by losing our ability to focus, but it barely touches the spiritual costs of our inattention. Yet this aspect seems crucial to me, no matter what your religious affiliation. After all, if you can't pay attention to your God, gods, or even your friends of Bell style higher power, how can you have a relationship with them? If you can't stop thinking long enough to simply feel their presence, how real can they be? Lisa from the other congregation was kind enough to share with me Paul's letters to the Galatians. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a deep cut Bible kind of person, but even I can sense his frustration with the easily distracted brethren. You foolish Galatians, he says, who has bewitched you? He goes on, are you so foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, are you now trying to finish by means of the flesh? Those Galatians could not keep their attention focused on the things that were truly important. Instead, like all of us, they were bewitched by something else. I see those competing spirits and flesh in my own mind. There are things that I know are worthy of my attention, but how often I am distracted by the easier, the more enjoyable. How many times have I picked up a worthy book, only to put it down again and again to snoop on a stranger's stories? Often a stranger I find inherently unlikable to begin with. Perhaps Paul understood the finite amount of tension we can all hold and how quickly we all are able to get distracted from our path. Perhaps even then, the unscrupulous understood the value of another person's stolen focus. There is a tension between what we want to focus on and what we can actually focus on. You can't blame our brains. They were designed to conserve energy at all costs. Our brain will often follow a heuristic or cognitive shortcut rather than considering a new solution to a familiar problem from scratch. Likewise, our chains of thought can dig metaphorical grooves into our brains. Even if we want to change the way we think, or perhaps allow new ideas to replace old ones, we can't easily do so. Those paths and shortcuts may allow our brains to function optimally, But they can also trap us in outmoded thoughts and ways of thinking, sapping us of the joy of spontaneity, creativity, and discovery that are so crucial to a fully lived life. For me, attention is faith and focus is devotion. Distraction and an overcrowded, overwhelmed mind are antithetical to connection, either with each other or our spiritual faith. Most of the time I have felt closest to any kind of real spiritual epiphany are times where I've been alone within an environment, either natural or man-made, that transcends description. Waking up in the middle of the night while camping outside to see the Milky Way overhead. There's nothing else, simply you and eternity. It's wonderful. And I'm sure you've all had similar experiences. In those moments, our minds stop spinning and the world begins to unfurl its mysteries, allowing our most subtle senses to see and feel them around us. Our attention both broadens into a deeper perception and narrows into absolute focus on what really matters. We can see an outline of a doorway that, if we are able to open it, will lead to the mysteries that quite literally surround us, but are often hidden from our distracted minds. And these mysteries are all around us, waiting to be noticed. In the church in my mother's village that was built in the Anglo-Saxon era, well over 1,500 years ago, there is a handwritten list of every priest or vicar who has ever led it. These names, written in large cursive, barely cover one side of paper, as each man's time spanned a good half century or so. Imagine that attention, that focus. The stones that pave the floor of the church have shallow paths worn in them, a physical representation of the paths we have in our brains, thinking the same thoughts over and over again. Walking those paths in our brain is involuntary, but imagine the commitment, the belief, and the perseverance it takes for a community to wear those paths in stone. A few villages over, another ancient church just outside of Oxford has an enduring statement of belief and hope. During World War II, a distraught mother commissioned a stained glass portrait of her son, killed in action. He looks down from his place in the slender, pointed early English window, immobilized on glass, frozen in lead, set back in deep walls of stone. How surprised that young man, should he be miraculously revived, might be to find himself there. And how single-minded, focused his mother must have been to place him there. Before I left this church, I added a note to the book of prayers, asking for them for my mother. This is not something I would generally do, but I felt the possibility that comes with attention. I felt the power of thousands of years of faith. Even if I couldn't quite feel the presence of God with the conviction of those long dead parishioners, I felt the way their belief still lingered in the air, in the stone, in the bronze and brass and wood, and it was enough. I picked up the pen and added my request to 1,500 years of prayers. Please heal our wounded bodies. Please revive our failing crops. Please reverse our unjust punishments and return our stolen animals. Please comfort our mothers. If I'm completely honest, I can't say I was deep in communion with God or necessarily feeling Jesus's presence in my heart like others have described, but in that moment I felt a profound focus and a sense of continuity with 1,000+ years of my predecessors, and it was enough. Buddhist tradition talks of the unfettered mind. Transcendental meditators aim to find stillness and expansiveness within. The Aboriginal writer Madruru says that Aboriginal spirituality is built around a feeling of oneness, of belonging, a connectedness with deep innermost feelings. Everything else is secondary. And this is what faith boils down to for me. A sense that we are not alone, that we belong to the long lineage of humanity, that those things that separate us are false and illusionary, that most humans are our brothers and sisters, that we are united by a desire to love and be loved, that if offered the chance, most would choose to be kind and to be our best selves. And perhaps most relevantly, that if we are divided, if we are turned against each other, it is because it is to the benefit of the divider to have us that way. These ideas feel natural and good, yet the forces that shape our online world seem to work in direct opposition to them. The writer Audre Lorde famously said that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. I'd add to that and say that protecting our attention, our focus, and our clarity of thought is likewise an act of purposeful, strategic, and essential rebellion. Refusing to participate in or to be sidetracked by subjective outrage, and instead seeking out and supporting objective truth is an act of community building. And yes, I understand that the concept of objective truth can be nebulous at times. My favorite podcast tagline is, "It was capitalism all along." It's funny, but they aren't joking. And the more I ponder where my ability to feel, think, or connect deeply, either to God or the world around me, has gone, the more I'm convinced that these qualities have been sacrificed to benefit some truly unscrupulous players. After all, refusing to be distracted is radically anti-capitalist. Turning off your notifications is a powerful act of boundary setting. Deleting social media apps is a rebellion against the richest and most powerful people in our society. These social media companies that are seeking to hijack our attention understand this. They tweak their algorithms, enhance their features, add filters, whatever it takes to get us to walk down those well-worn pathways of distraction, outrage, and separation one more time. Imagine a company which subjects its over 15,000 moderators to viewing unspeakably horrific flag content, murders, rapes, child abuse, animal abuse, live stream massacres. Imagine a company that wantonly and shamelessly causes havoc in nascent democracies, or expands into countries where it has no moderators who even speak the local languages. In Ethiopia, for instance, where this company had no moderators who speak Amharic or Oromo, and thus did nothing to stop the threats of violence against the Tigrayan people. Imagine a company that actively helps people like Bolsonaro in Brazil come to power. Imagine a company which fully understands its bottom line relies on our anger, our visceral rage, and our manufactured hatred for each other. This company is, of course, Facebook. Here's the conundrum, though. I think these companies cause great harm, yet I can also see how they can be invaluable and beneficial. They can give artists and writers an outlet to share their work and build businesses. They can enable people who are in any way and for any reason isolated from their communities and those they love, a place to find friendship and like-minded folks. I absolutely loved Facebook when I first joined. I made friends and created a local sewing group based off of the women I met through the site. For years, our group page was my #1 favorite thing on the internet. We had a lively and lovely group chat thread, posted pictures of the things we were sewing and the babies we were having. And even as our group dispersed across America, the connection stayed strong. Eventually, however, that joy was submerged by awful arguments with old friends and terrible lies spread by elder relatives who didn't understand the algorithm was not being honest with them. You've probably had similar experiences. I can imagine a Facebook that is still a joy to be on, that doesn't bring out the worst in myself and the people I love. I can imagine a Facebook that rewards thoughtful conversations and measured responses rather than impulsive lizard brain reactions. I believe these companies have the possibility to be so good, and I believe they have a responsibility to be good because they have supplanted our newspapers and replaced our town squares. So surely they should at least be held to the same standards as those old civic staples were. As David mentioned, I'm famous in my family for my many, many, many letters to the editor. But who do you write to at Facebook? How do you attempt to hold it to account? Perhaps the most indicative thing about Facebook is that it has consistently rejected suggestions that would be beneficial for the communities it claims to serve. For instance, a few years back, an engineer suggested a feature that would alert users whenever two people who have mutually designated each other as close friends were within a few miles of each other. Imagine the possibilities for those kind of serendipitous, near spontaneous meetings that are essential to connection, community, and friendship. Yet Facebook realized that getting people offline and out into the real world would harm its engagement-based business model, so this idea was scrapped. The author of Stolen Focus suggests a subscription model rather than the current free model, which is subsidized by selling our data, could be an enormous engine for good. And I agree. Imagine if Facebook no longer felt compelled to prioritize constant outraged engagement above all else, but could focus on creating real community instead. These companies have a choice to look deeply at themselves, acknowledge everything wrong with their business model, and begin to repair the things they have broken. And I would argue that we have a responsibility to demand they change as well. Frankly, we should be righteously angry at these companies' gaslighting of us, their users. After all, they encourage us to believe that if we have a problem with social media, it's our fault. That if we are too weak-willed to simply put down our phones and get on with the things that matter to us, well, that's our bad. Here's the truth. As a former Google engineer, Tristan Harris put it, the race to get attention has become more and more aggressive. We have to predict how to keep you hooked. So we crawl deeper down the brainstem into your social validation, which triggered the introduction of likes and followers. Instead of getting your attention, it was much cheaper to get you addicted to getting attention from other people. In the last few years, we have seen just how hard we need to keep on fighting to preserve the things that we love about our communities, our friends, our families, and our world. As I write, a vastly wealthy Republican has gifted another cool billion, tax-free, to the brilliant minds behind such hits as the Federalist Society. These people are very focused on getting what they want, and there's little more they want than 300 million Americans sitting in front of their screens, soaking up the absurd belief that this country is filled with patriots or traitors and you need to pick a side now. The angrier we are, the more our attention jumps between Twitter hot takes, YouTube deep dives, and never-ending Facebook comment wars, the less we notice both the good and bad that is happening in our actual physical world that surrounds us. And perhaps, like me, you find it harder to feel that spiritual side of yourself and to engage deeply with it. We need to keep our attention sharp, our focus on point, if we want to prevail against this kind of abusive domination in our country. In fact, I think along with civil rights, women's rights, LGBTQIA+ rights, and climate justice, we need to add the right to a focused, clear mind to that list. This country once rallied to fight back against smog and industrial pollution. It took a river catching fire in Ohio and a book on the horrors of DDT to do it. But both left and right rallied to save something that we all agreed was precious. Richard Nixon even supported the founding of the EPA. I would argue that social media, as it is currently structured, is a kind of pollution. I mean, nobody designed Facebook to be terrible, just as no one ever designed a factory to give a community cancer. The ill effects came out of good intentions, and with regulation, balance can be restored. I think Facebook and all social media has the potential to be a real positive again. But just as we outlaw the lead that once went into our gasoline, we need to find a way to legislate out the most toxic, dangerous elements of social media and ensures that it does as little harm as possible. We can look back now and agree that the fact that our children have been harmed and damaged by lead is a terrible thing. Agreeing that doesn't mean we have to give up on cars, though. It simply meant we had to find a way to make the gasoline better. And to extend the metaphor, we are still actively legislating and developing ways to make cars even less harmful in the future. The social media companies have, despite literally causing genocides in Myanmar and Ethiopia, escaped any similar legislation. Why? We can live happily with social media, but it must be a social media that prioritizes truth, transparency, and ethical behavior over engagement. In closing, if I can encourage anything, I hope I can encourage you to fight for your right to focus on the things that actually matter to you and that you care about. I hope I can encourage you to view social media as something that can be benign or can be dangerous, but must be regulated and made to work for us rather than our shareholders. Our attention is a precious, finite, irreplaceable resource. And most, if not all, of the entities that are actively seeking to break it do not deserve our time, our eyeballs, or the mental energy they are draining away from us. So turn off those notifications you don't really need. Delete those apps. Use social media in a way that serves you, not them. Treasure your focus and guard your attention. And may I recommend the unchanging joy of unfurling a crisp newspaper and sitting down to read the news of the day. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks. I needed that. What came to mind is this seems like a really important op-ed. And so if you can submit it somewhere, yeah.
Oh, thank you. You know, I love a good letter, outrage letter to an editor. So maybe I could.
That's kind of your thing. Wow. Yeah. Well, folks, I was thinking too of Psalm 48, I think it is. Be still and know that I am God, which kind of tells us that if we don't experience stillness, we don't experience God.
Definitely.
So our friends, what's on your heart, folks?
I'll share something that the original draft of this was like even more radical, and my sister read it and she's like, no, you got to take that down 50%.
Okay.
I was,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Kayla.
I was just thinking, I know, obviously many people feel the same way. I mean, and I, although you expressed it so beautifully, I'm wondering if you have identified anybody who's actively working on creating that better social media. I know people have tried, and there are some alternatives. And of course, there's always the kind of, how do you get people to come to it? That sort of thing. I'm just wondering, how do we build this thing that that represents what we really want to get out of social media, the positives without the, is it just regulating what exists? I mean, do you think that's the most realistic pathway, or is it coming from a new starting point that doesn't have capitalism at its roots, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, probably that, but I think at this point, Facebook is kind of inescapable. So I think regulating Facebook is essential, and we need to see it as a public utility. It's like the water, it's like the power, it's like the roads. I think Mark Zuckerberg is the most dangerous man who's ever lived, but that's a whole nother talk. I think Amy Klobuchar, I think senators like her are doing real work. But the one thing I would suggest is take social media off your phones. Like, because I still use social media, but I only use it on my laptop. And that means when I leave the house, Facebook stays behind. Like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they don't come with me. I think that's actually exponentially made my mind freer and happier. So that is one thing that we can all do today. And it changed my life. Like I felt like I was kind of losing my mind, and that really helped.
So I think, thank you so much, Caroline. That was deeply powerful.
Thanks.
And I think that Facebook can be also, or the activity of Facebook can also be replaced with working or social activism or other kind of addictions that take you away from being completely present.
Mm-hmm.
And And I would say like in maybe 2016, I noticed that I became less present. And I did so because I was scared,
Mm.
because I was scared to be alone in my mind, in my thoughts, and in myself. And as I removed myself from social media, just the last couple years, I'm still on, but not nearly as active. I've noticed I replaced that with working
Mhm.
or with volunteering or with something else that occupied my my mind enough so that I didn't have to pay attention to my thoughts and my heart. So I think your message is much more, it's bigger than social media. I think it's a call for us to return to ourselves.
Yeah. And I like what you say about, replacing it with working, because and volunteering, because I found, I do a fair bit of volunteering, and you're often volunteering with people who are just, and I'm super liberal. I'm volunteering with somebody who's super conservative, and when you have that face-to-face time, that the intimate time with somebody, like, you realize that, this idea that we're enemies is absurd, and I think that's invaluable.
I'm
I w-
struck with, here we're talking about David writing the Psalms how many years ago? And so it's not absolutely an only current problem. It's a human condition.
That's
And I
right.
think that, that's something with social media too, is that it finds, these little weaknesses that are built into being human. That's just part of human nature. And it just, it, it exacerbates them and it magnifies them. And I don't know.
I was taking some time away from Facebook, and that's I mistakenly did not go back on last week. That's why our last Sunday is not recorded on Facebook, because I frantically found that I was outside of my account when the time came for us to go on to Facebook. I hadn't thought about that. Um, that just shows how much a part of life it has become for me. And I had an encounter this week, and it's part of what my theme is next Sunday. Even though I'd already decided on this, there was just real confirmation, because there was this one retired pastor who used to live in Santa Barbara, moved to another state, and he would contest everything I would write for a long time, but then he just kind of faded away, and I was pretty happy about that. But then about a week ago, he came back with guns blazing. And I private messaged him and said, this is, my Facebook page. If it bothers you so much, you could just unfollow me and maybe you'd be happier. And here's what he said. I had to read it a few times to believe that this is actually what he said. But he said, David, a few years ago, you told me that you would help me to find Jesus, but I would have to let go of white evangelicalism. And his next words were, I'm open to that. And it was so inconsistent with everything he had ever written to me that I wondered if it was a typo. And anyway, that's an unusual development. Yeah.
And it's so strange. Like, I had really, really good friends that in New Mexico, I lived with them and I cared for their property and I took care of their animals. And then once we started connecting on Facebook, that friendship ended because, all I saw was like their political beliefs, which I found really disturbing. And, it's just, Like, what is real? Like, is what I experienced firsthand when I was with them real, or is what I see them say on Facebook real? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, obviously we're living in a world where there's a lot that's not real that has become real, and that's our contention, right? That's our issue.
I wonder if part of the problem is that with computers and social media, we're able to isolate ourselves and pick who we want to associate with more than before, when you had to live with people who had different opinions and different likes and dislikes. And I worry about that, because it seems that in my lifetime I've seen such a radical divide in our country, where one side, 51 to 49% of the country feels very strongly one way, and the other side feels very strongly the other way. And they do not see eye to eye on anything. And it's like, whatever happened? I remember my mom or my dad doing something that I didn't really care for, and I still love them. You just figure out how to get along. And right now, there's an issue going on in our community that is pitting environmentalists against environmentalists.
Mhm.
And many of these environmentalists, of which I am one, are my friends.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You look at this issue this way? And I got to realize, these are people I've liked and associated with for decades. And I can't let the devil step in here and try to divide us over a topic. How important is that topic compared to decades of friendship? And I think we as human beings need to go back a step and remember how to get along with people who don't think the same way.
Yeah.
And the thing I would add to that is, when I was researching for this talk, you mentioned at the beginning, like in our country, this is happening globally. Like,
It is.
I'm sure you're all familiar with what happened when Facebook was introduced to Myanmar. It's shocking. They went from having essentially most people didn't have cell phones, and then Facebook came in and offered its services for free. And within 4 years, there was like genocide, there's mass displacement, and Facebook representatives of that community went to Facebook's offices in Menlo Park and said, people are dying, genocide is going to happen, you have to do something. And they refused to do anything. It's just, this is global, and it's really bad. I don't have any answers of what to do, because, as I said, Mark Zuckerberg is the most dangerous man alive.
Well, folks,
Pastor David, if I may, I think Natasha wanted to say something. Go ahead, Natasha. I see you.
Hey, Kenichi. Yeah, this is such a great conversation. Caroline, thank you so much for this presentation, because it's gotten me to think a lot about my social media use and having to feel like I have to be on there because of writing stuff.
Right.
But also, I'm also troubled, or just sort of in conflict with this idea that this new reality for America, because myself as a Black woman, when they talk about like bird watching while Black, or house shopping while Black, or selling a house while Black, or all these things, like these are things that I already knew as a Black woman and living in a Black, like none of this is a surprise to me. And I remember being on a panel with white liberal women who were really strong voices in different movements, including the LGBT. And it was right after Donald Trump was elected. And I wrote an essay called How to Brace for Impact, because of what I saw was coming, and we all have to buckle down because it's going to be harsh. This is when he was just nominated. And I remember one of the women who was a white woman, looked at me and she says, I just can't believe that anything like this is happening. And I looked at her, I said, is it true that you just didn't believe me? All
Yeah.
these years that we've known each other, all these years that I've told you that I've encountered these racist things, whether it was getting a cab, whether it was trying to get to eat, whether just looking around in a neighborhood, driving around, being curious, and then people coming out to see what I was doing in their neighborhood. Like, you didn't believe me all these years? You really thought I was just a complainer? You know, now you're going to see what I've seen, what Black people in this country have seen, and it's going to be really harsh. So for me, Facebook just brought to life what we already knew. So, and it's strange to see how people are negotiating something. So I never went to someone like, you just know, you get that feeling. Like if I was a gay woman and I knew somebody was like super anti-LGBT, you get that feeling, that sense. So in
Yeah.
that same way, when I would engage with people who I knew were racist or had certain ideas, I could feel it. So I already knew. So it's not a surprise to me, but it makes me wonder how we'll move forward. Like, can I go back? I can't look at. Fun for me was watching a horror movie, with white people and being so scared. Don't go in there. It was like this funny thing. It was like relief that you didn't have to see what I saw every day. And now it's not there. So that's the
Right.
discomfort for me as a Black woman. So social media to me is like, I know in the Bible it says, in the end days, the hearts of men will be revealed. And I feel like we're in that part where you can't hide from who you are anymore. So we're in the revelation phase. So how do we engage with the truth of other humans who don't agree with us? So this is
Yeah.
really interesting to me. I'm sorry for going on so long.
Oh no, thank you. And it's so it's so flattering to have you comment on my work. So
Well, I'm really glad you spoke up, Natasha, because that is so real. I've wondered about my own mental health and Diane too, over the decades. They don't even think this is real. They don't. They think I'm making stuff up, or that I'm paranoid, or what. And that's a test of your own mental well-being, right? And there are things that I have experienced that I didn't mention to Diane because it would have been like, okay, that's just a bit much. And then she's had experiences that she just thought, no, I won't even bring it up. He's had enough to deal with this today or this week. And that's not healthy for families. That's not healthy for relationships, to not bring up stuff because you just don't want to burden them any farther. Hey, Ash. Well, Cheryl's going to lead us in communion.
Let us quiet our hearts and minds as we come to table. On the night when Jesus was betrayed, he took the bread and broke it and said, "This bread is my body broken for you. Take and eat." On the same night after supper, he took the cup and said, "This cup is the cup of the new covenant poured out for you. Take and drink." Let us pray. We gather here fully present in the moment, gracious God, our hearts filled with thanksgiving and praise. We give thanks for all the gifts with which you have blessed us, for the bread and the cup that is for all humans, for the created world in which we live, for family and friends with whom we share our lives, for food on our plates and roofs over our heads, for all those things that make life good, for the gift of Jesus. We offer our thanks and praise. May our hearts, minds, and hands always be open to share the blessings that we have. May the love of God, the strength of Christ, and the comfort of the Spirit be with each one of us, now and always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And we're going to finish up now. Let me just say that, yes, a lot of us Black folks are paranoid, but can you blame us? If you knew